Hey everybody, Dr. Ray here. What we're going to do is I'm going to give a general overview about mobile learning, design, and development. I want to talk about mobile versus computer development a little bit and talk about some of the design and development considerations when you decide how you're going to develop things, and some, different ways to compare between, apps versus a website, desktop versus mobile, all that kind of good stuff. All right, y'all ready? Let's go. All right, so first of all, before I even get into it, I just want to remind everyone, mobile learning, mobile design and development, huge, huge, huge industry. We're on these things 24/7, right? You're on this all the time. I'm on this phone so often. And if I'm not on my phone, well, I'm on my iPad. And if I'm not on my iPad, then I'm on my computer. So I've always got something going on, right? Usually a lot of mobile stuff, right? So, we have all these statistics that can show how often people are using their mobile phones. But it is a lot, man. More than 50% of all web traffic takes place on a mobile device. And that's not surprising. My wife seriously uses her mobile phone for like 99% of the stuff she does. She uses her phone, that's it. So this isn't surprising. People are spending a significant amount of time on their mobile devices, which is why whenever we develop training now, we have to really make sure we're probably developing for PC and mobile, right? We're probably developing for both. I mean, not all the time, but a lot of times we are. So we need to think about that. All right. So what is mobile learning? The boring definition, mobile learning takes place on a mobile, it's learning that takes place on a mobile device. No kidding. We know what that is. If you're here watching this, what is mobile learning? It's learning that takes place on a mobile device. It's nothing new, nothing like, this isn't like 2003, okay? But there are some new strategies, or I shouldn't even say new, but there are strategies that are being utilized more efficiently in a mobile environment than in computer-based. And one of those is micro-learning. So if you're not familiar with the term micro-learning, it's really looking at chunks, small pieces of learning. Really quick. Hey, I have a question. Let me look it up really quick. Here's the 2 to 5 minute explanation. That's micro learning. The goal of micro learning is to get you to continue a course and continue to learn more, but it's broken up using nice strategies. But that's really the beauty of mobile learning, is that it fits with micro learning so well. Obviously, when you're designing for the mobile device, you're still using all of those instructional strategies, whether they're, your organizational strategies like Gagne's 9 events, you're still using, multimedia principles and all that good stuff to design and develop with a mobile device. But it's much more suited for shorter periods of learning than, I'll tell you what, and I'll get into this in just a minute anyway. So let me hold off. I'm going to get into this length of time thing in just a sec, right here. So mobile device, as I said, it's really suited for this micro learning, like less than 5 minutes, like little chunks. I'll tell you what, I don't want to sit on this cell phone for an hour-long training session, but I have to say, I don't really want to sit on my PC for an hour-long training session either. But it's a lot more comfortable to look on a nice bigger screen for a longer period of time if I'm reading, focusing, doing things, than my mobile device. So if I'm talking about a longer training session, I'm probably going to focus a little more on the PC side of things. So this chart that I have up here is a great comparison between the two. Now, a lot of times when I'm developing training, especially like e-learning stuff, I am developing for both a PC and mobile device 50% each, so not like one more than the other. Like, my clients want it to just work great on both. So I've got to really take that into consideration when I develop. And I'll talk about some of the common development tools we use in just a minute. I'm going to I'll go into that, but I want to go through this comparison. So, mobile's better suited for short training, and computers better suited for longer training. And there's going to be people out there that are going to say, well, all training should only be 5 minutes or 20 minutes. It should all be short. Guess what? While I kind of agree with that, I have to say, training's only short. We only want our training to be shorter and shorter because it's boring. I don't want a movie to only be 20 minutes. The movie's exciting and fun. Other forms of entertainment are longer. Why can they be longer? Because they're fun and exciting. If you can make a really cool training session, guess what? 20 minutes is nothing. If you put me in a really cool, I've seen some VR simulations done by the military where I can go in there and man, I want to spend all day in that simulation because it's such a cool piece of training. So the whole time thing bothers me just a little bit. All right, mobile device, obviously our interactions are with our fingers, right? Whereas PC, it's nice and, I'm using a mouse and keyboard. So that's some different interactions, some human computer interactions, considerations that I need to take when I'm actually designing or developing something. Mobile device really is one column, right? Like one column. Whereas a PC, I can have multiple. I can have things all over the place. I can have people with 3 monitors, like I have set up right in front of me right now, that have things like all crazy, So there's different setups with the PC that aren't really available on the mobile device. Mobile, usually internet and data is always required unless they're on an app, which I'm going to talk about app versus, web development in just a second. And that's a disadvantage when you're talking about like third world if you're trying to train like third world populations or populations that may not have internet access. And computer can obviously be either. You can install something on a computer, right? Mobile, again, usually breaks things into subsets, more of that chunking, more of that micro learning, whereas the computer can handle larger things a little better. And they can both have video games. They can both do cool simulations. They can both have just general content presentation of factual information. Like they can all do that kind of stuff really well. I can watch all kinds of stuff on my phone, the same kinds of things that I can do on my PC. So that's just a good comparison. I really like that chart just to see that example. All right, so let's talk about apps versus like a website or e-learning. I think this is an important topic. We don't develop a lot of mobile apps, and it's mostly because it's difficult and there are some disadvantages, but there are some reasons why we could potentially be asked to do it. So it's just important to know the differences if you're a learning designer or anything like that. So first of all, obviously apps need to be installed. They're OS dependent. So like an Apple app only runs on Apple. And they're usually pretty expensive to develop. Whereas a website e-learning can be used on a phone, on a PC, can be used anywhere, right? It can work on Android, Apple, iPad, PC, Mac, you name it, it's working. Google Chrome, as long as you don't have some like weird plug-in, it's working. It's usually less expensive to develop than an app overall. If we're talking about like content to content, like comparing apples to apples, like the same exact content developed on the web versus a mobile app, it's going to be way less expensive to develop it on the web. So if we're looking at it, that kind of comparison, much less expensive. All right. So now I want to talk about the 3 types of development that I just talked about. I talked about 2, apps versus web, but what I really want to talk about are the 2 types of apps we would consider, which are Apple and Android. And then I want to talk about how most instructional designers are really developing stuff using HTML5. So if you were considering an app, it would be, and you were considering an Apple app, you would use Xcode to develop it, which is really like C++, language, C# language. It's pretty difficult to develop an app on the Apple ecosystem. I've developed several, and it was much more challenging than Android. I'll put it that way. You must have a Mac to develop it, which is a huge disadvantage. So usually what you have to do if you're a PC user like me is you can actually rent space on a Mac online. It's a couple dollars a month to like rent like a virtual desktop basically, which is kind of a downer. I didn't like that aspect of it either. Their review process. So the other thing is with Apple, if you develop an app and you might spend all this time and money and Apple might say, we don't like it, we're not putting it on our store, and that's it, you're shut down. You cannot get it on devices. So as far as ease of use goes, I didn't think it was that user-friendly. I thought it could be a lot better. But it's the biggest app store, and if you're trying to develop an app, that's where you're going to go. So you got to make those considerations. Whereas Android, I thought was way easier to develop with. They use Java, they use Eclipse, which is Java-based. I thought it was much more user-friendly and much easier to develop an app. There is no review process, like you literally just put it on the Android store. It can get taken off though, but here's the cool thing. Even if your app gets taken off the Android App Store, you can just put a link on your website for it and people can download it right on your Android phone. So Android's a lot more like flexible. So if you were considering an app, those are kind of your two options, and you got to weigh the pros and cons, and you can develop an app for both, which is what a lot of people do. But financially, it doesn't make sense. User-friendly wise, doesn't really make sense. Most instructional designers are going cross-platform. We're developing in HTML5. That doesn't mean I'm using HTML to program. It can. So I can use the web, I can use Dreamweaver, I can use programming to develop something in HTML, cascading style sheets, and JavaScript. I can do that, and there are reasons why I would do that in some cases. But most instructional designers, if I'm developing e-learning today, if someone came to me, which clients do, I'm actually working on like 3 or 4 projects right now. If a client came to me and said, we need e-learning, it's got to run on the mobile device, it's got to run on the computer, what do you suggest? I'm going to suggest 1 or 2 programs. I'm going to suggest 2 programs, kind of show them the pros and cons and pick one based on their needs. That would be Articulate, and we're using a lot of Articulate Rise right now, or Adobe Captivate. Those are the 2. That's it. The cool thing about each of these pieces of software, they're very similar to PowerPoint in development, but they're very easy. They don't really require programming. Maybe some knowledge of programming is very helpful, especially as you get more advanced in them. It's extremely helpful. But in general, it's like kind of developing on PowerPoint on steroids is how I usually describe it. The other thing is that they publish so easily. It publishes, and it's this responsive piece of software that works well on the phone, works well on the PC, works well on the tablet. It publishes to everything in an HTML5 format. You can install it on a learning management system or just put it up on the web, and everyone's going to be able to run it so easily. So that's the huge advantage of publishing with one of these tools. So a lot of instructional designers are using one of these or the other, which is Articulate or Captivate, or they're just hand coding it. It just depends on what your goals are, what you're really trying to do. So, and I'll give you an example of when I would hand code versus use Articulate or Captivate. So if a client was asking me to develop something that was strictly for the mobile device or really designed for the mobile device, I probably would start to consider hand coding it versus using Articulate or Captivate, depending on their needs and what they want. Because there's a lot of things that would push me over to one of these tools. But I may do that because I think that standard programming is much more customizable. Obviously, it's 100% customizable for the mobile device than one of these tools are. I think these tools are much better at PC development. We make it work on the phone. It looks pretty good, and it is good. It works well enough, but it's not like it's not as good as me hand coding it. So those are some of my thoughts. That's my personal opinion. Everything I'm doing with clients right now is Articulate or Captivate, and they're running it on all their devices, and that's awesome. 5, 6, 7 years ago, I did not do that. You couldn't do that. You had no choice but to hand code it, but it's getting a lot better now. It's at a good place right now that I'm happy with. All right, so that's the basics of mobile design and development. That's just some really basic introductory info to get you going, to get you start thinking about when a client comes to you and says, how do I develop for the mobile device? Later on.